Welcome to Included Not Excluded, the podcast from Beyond Autism. I'm Tracie Coultas-Pitman. I'm Chief Executive of Beyond Autism. And this first episode is all about inclusion in education. What does it really mean? How does it feel for families? And what role does leadership play in making it real? I'm joined today by Professor Toby Salt, an education leader who has shaped schools and policy for decades. And by Nikkie-Chekita Jordan, a parent and advocate who brings powerful lived experience. Together, we'll explore the barriers, the breakthroughs, and the small changes that can make the biggest difference. Hearing Nikki talk all about Noah makes it so clear how much inclusion matters in practice, and inclusion in its broadest sense. The highs, the lows, the hope, it's all there in her story. It's also clear that behind every family's journey sits a system of schools and policies. So, Toby, I'd like to turn to you.
So I am a bit of an oddity in the sense that I was a teacher, head teacher, then executive head, one of the first people to run more than one school and a federation, then moved to working 2 days a week for the Department for Education in Tony Blair's innovation unit, getting bottom-up innovation, then went to support the establishment of the National College of School Leadership, which trained head teachers, and went on to be the deputy chief executive. But my roots go back to my early teaching career, where I fell into special educational needs in a time before there was as much labelling, as much understanding and much clarity on what special educational needs there are, and where we knew even less than we do now, and we don't know enough now, about the plumbing and wiring inside people's brains and how our minds and our thinking and our learning work. And I was a special head. So I always come from the background of the more extreme end, I suspect. And I think that is one of the things, that there is a lot of vortex. And the danger is within this, we forget those with the more significant needs. Because to a lot of people, SEND is a very big bag. And for policymakers, they're looking at the large figures and the large numbers. Of course, I look at the extreme ends of the youngsters who are costing a lot of money and have very complex and profound needs. And back in 2010, I wrote a review for Ed Balls when he was Secretary of State on the issues relating to providing teacher supply for those with what was called then profound and multiple learning difficulties. One thing that hasn't changed is we love to label, we love to badge people, and we have created a system which is a little bit combative and sees parents having to fight. One of my problems, going back to my days as a special head and a head of secondary and head of, so I've done mainstream, I've done independent, I've done state, I've done mainly state special as a leader. And those same parents who fought so valiantly to get their youngster, in the old days a statement, now an EHCP, carried on fighting the school because that's what they sort of learned and demand for the vulnerable young person that they loved and cared for. And that has got to change. And I do think one of the things that's refreshing is at least this government is biting that bullet and recognizing that it's not working for the youngsters at the heart of the system. It's not working in terms of affordability. And it's not working actually for professionals who you quite rightly say want to do the very best they can.
And I think it's probably another whole podcast episode to talk about education, health, care plans, and the system that's been created around that. And of course is linked to any of the conversations that we're having around, where we very much want children to be included, not excluded. So just thinking about the barriers as you see it. So across all your leadership roles, what do you see as the biggest barriers to inclusion today?
So after, working for government, I went to run Ormiston Academies Trust, which has 52 schools across the country in some of the most challenging areas. And that had a real variety of special needs provision and a real mix of youngsters, mainstream, mainly secondary schools, but with a real mixed group of students, and some with very high incidence special education needs and quite high incidence of EHCPs. And I was determined, I sort of felt quite personally responsible that this send ought to be good. And it was so variable. And I could see that it was also hit and miss and dependent on local authorities. And so there's a bit about the local authorities' expertise, skills, engagement, and academies often sit outside that, which makes it more complicated.
Yeah.
The other issue that I realized very quickly was teachers' confidence, understanding, and knowledge. And looking back through my own leadership roles, I'd invested a lot in professional development for teachers so they understood and could perceive things from a student's needs. You know, the usual, slightly cliched, if you want to know what it's like to be a visual impairment, giving them goggles that showed them what it was like to be visually impaired, teaching them Makaton for those that needed that level of support, getting them to understand how confusing and how difficult life can be for a youngster with autism, looking at the world and the structures and the noise and the barriers and the smelly dining halls and getting them to have some empathy understanding. Professionals want to do the best they can for students, but we don't invest enough in that.
Okay, so looking forward a bit, Toby, what gives you hope for the future?
I've got plenty of hope, but I don't think it's all broken now. I think, as a country, we're spending far too much time saying how awful and broken everything is. And it is irritating
Yes.
at times. And, public services and school services and health services are under stress. Of course they are. But in reality, I'm very optimistic that we have a much more inclusive culture. I'm not that old, Tracie.
I never said you were.
No, I don't. But I do feel old sometimes. But I look back and I think, 40 years ago, I can think of youngsters who I taught who we didn't know what was, and be ready to be shocked, what was wrong with them. And we didn't know how to adjust for them. This was in a mainstream secondary. That's partly why I got into special education, because I became fascinated.
Mm.
And I know that it wasn't that it was wrong. It was the system that was wrong. It was the provision that was wrong. It was the environment that was wrong. It was the teaching that was the wrong. Nothing wrong with them. Brilliant, bright bunnies who needed just that level of provision and tailoring and differentiation to actually access the curriculum and know what was doing it. And that wouldn't happen now. It really wouldn't happen now. People understand that.
Yeah.
I have a personal view that I think we've become overly medicalized and overly obsessed with labels.
Yeah.
And I think we've created a system where labels means prizes, which
Yes.
means extra hours of a one-to-one with an adult or something else, as if it's going to be a magical cure. And then I watch, particularly in some mainstream state provision, where youngsters are overly dependent on a specialist adult and actually not learning the independence and social skills they need to themselves. So there's a real balance to that. So I am optimistic because I think we get it more. We understand more. These youngsters are not hidden. On the whole, they're included. On the whole, they're included more in society. They're going out. You see them in the working world. You see them not as often as you should, but you do. You see them in shops. And also, we sort of now accept, which again is heretical, that adults too, we're all a bit wrong too. And that, none of us is the same. And that all of our brains could collect labels because we all learn things in different ways. I absolutely know I'm a bit peculiar. My children tell me regularly. They're forever giving me labels. But, I didn't. They didn't exist when I was at school. And in reality, I can look back and I think that I have more optimism to understand that people will do it. And there is more desire to be included. And actually, in terms of being pragmatic and sensible about resources, the more young people who are properly included, the less the cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also, as societal view changes, as the teenagers of 20 years ago become parents, their expectation and view of what should be open and available for their children in their own schooling has shifted, hasn't it? The difference from when our parents were choosing schools for us and what was on offer, it's chalk and cheese to where we are now. And the kind of, I think, the expectation of new parents in terms of the outcomes for their children has increased. And that's also then increased the pressure on the system.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I am optimistic. And I'm optimistic this government will not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm optimistic that there will be investment in professional development and in making sure that young people have the appropriate provision. I'm optimistic that we might have a new generation of leaders and teachers who see the advantage and the joy of working in the sector. I'm optimistic that parents hopefully won't have to feel like they have to be combative and a champion in a world of silence.
Thank you, Toby. What really strikes me is how your perspective connects with Nikkie's. Families feel the impact of those system-level decisions every single day. It shows us inclusion isn't just about one classroom. It's about leadership, culture, and consistency across the board. So, how are you feeling this week? Because I know little man has gone off to school this week. So how are you feeling and how's it going?
Yeah. Oh, I am so excited, and it's just been so lovely. Like, everyone has really embraced us, and we're getting used to the whole, because it's a bit of a dance, the way that the cars kind of come in and drive out. It's very synchronized. It's like synchronized swimming. It's very well organized. So we're getting used to how that works. I don't actually feel comfortable doing that whole driving in thing yet. So I just bring the buggy through to where his classroom is. But maybe in the future I will feel better with that. But he's been doing so great. He's just having half days at the moment, which is great because he's never done a full day before. So that was discussed with us that we can kind of continue that, and we're pushing each day a little bit more just to keep him comfortable with it all. So it's so wonderful seeing him in his little uniform, all dressed up. He looks so grown up. I can't believe my baby is now a little boy at school. It's amazing.
It's a big step, isn't it? So, Nikkie, tell us about your son. How old is he now? And tell us all the amazing things about Noah.
So he's now 5. He was 5 in June, and he's quite a big boy. I'm told he's in quite the high percentiles for both his weight and his height, which, having a little mum, everyone's like, "Oh my goodness, how have you got such a big son and you're so short?" And it's like, genetics. They do magical things. But he is a little ball of energy, and he's the child I always wanted. And despite all the challenges, he is perfection just as he is. So, yeah.
That's a great phrase from a mum, isn't it? That's absolutely the way it should be. So, just for the benefit of people listening, does Noah have a diagnosis? We know that he's got special educational needs. Does he have a diagnosis? Is that something that's important to you?
So he does have a diagnosis now. We had him diagnosed last November. And previous to that, I wasn't that keen on having a diagnosis, just because his additional needs were very evident. He had an EHCP, but I didn't want him to be pigeonholed as anything that happens, oh, it must be because of his autism. So his dad was very patient with me and kind of just waited until I was ready. And then, because we wanted to get him into a particular school, we needed a diagnosis. So at that point, I started to push a bit harder with the community pediatrician and speech and language to make that happen. And it happened for us, fortunately, very, very quickly, which is good. And it meant that we could apply to the particular school that we wanted.
Yeah. So then when you were trying to decide on a school, what was it like navigating that system?
I think I used the word tricky a lot. It was quite challenging because when you're then picking a school, you're then having to liaise with the local authority, which was an experience that I think you have to have a very, very strong persona about you in order to be able to do, because they can make you quite cross a lot of the time. So what should be a fairly straightforward process, and also if you think you're dealing with a child with additional needs 24 hours a day, which can be as wonderful and as beautiful and as unicorn-like as it is very challenging and exhausting. And then when you have to deal with the local authority on top of that, it can break your spirit a little bit.
Mm. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear how stressful you found it. And what I'm more sorry about is that it's not an isolated story. We hear that from many families. And I was talking, in the conversation with Professor Toby Salt, he was very much talking about, wouldn't it be great if we could stop it all being so combative all the time, for parents and for local authorities and for professionals. There doesn't need to be a big fight about everything. Like you say, something that should be quite simple then becomes quite difficult. So if every teacher could understand one thing about autistic children, what would you want that to be?
Just one thing?
No, you can say more than
There are
one,
lots
Nikki.
of
That's
things.
fine. Yeah, give me your list.
If I could, if I could just pick one thing in this very moment, I think it would be that behavior is communication.
Mm,
And what might look like defiance or withdrawal in a child can often be a signal of their stress, their overwhelm, their sensory overload. And if we could just sometimes just breathe out and just give these kids just a little time and space, it would make the world of difference.
mm,
And the second thing
mm-hmm,
is really listening to the families, because they're doing this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and really taking on board what they say to you. If they say their child doesn't enjoy this, or for example, my son is very tablet centric, and there is a lot of judgment and prejudice around using tablets in children. And oh my goodness, you must be such an awful parent because you let them have a tablet or whatever. If you know how much that tablet supports and helps my son to regulate and
mm,
get through a day and tough situations, and that's another thing that early years they really supported us with and embraced, that we've now been able to use his tablet as a real tool to help him to get the best out of his days, is just incredible. Because if he had gone to a mainstream or even an art, he wouldn't have that. They would have wanted to take away his tablet instantly from him,
mm.
because that's not what we do here. That's not, it's not individually tailored to the child. And that's another thing I would want teachers to know, is that we have to be individually tailoring things each child.
Nikki, that's a great message. I just got one more question, if that's all right, Nikki. So you say that Noah's in a specialist school now, and he's just started this week, and that's all very exciting for him. You were also saying earlier how important it was for you that he could play alongside and was with neurotypical children. So are you going to be able to manage that balance, do you think? And do you think the school will help with that? What's your expectations around that?
So, with liaising with his school, I understand that the children will get a chance to kind of work in small groups and interact together. And at this stage, for me, it's less important whether he's around neurotypical children or not. So we do lots of activities outside of school. We swim, we soft play, and there's lots of children around. We go to the park, and he likes to kind of take an interest in the children around him. So I think I needn't have been worried about it so much, that he'll just find his way, which is what he's been doing.
Mm,
I think my tendency probably as a human being is to over worry about everything and try to be a bit of a micromanager. And that is exhausting for a start. And
Sounds it.
also not even particularly helpful at times, and it is about kind of letting go a little bit. And he is doing fantastically in life. He is really, really thriving, and he's such a happy little boy. And that is all I have ever wanted. The rest we can figure out. We can figure out the potty training, I don't want to eat this, I want to eat that instead. All of those little details, we can figure all of that out. The fact that he is happy and he's healthy, I think I'm winning as a parent.
And I think on that note, Nikki, we're going to end the questions. That's a great place to end. You are winning as a parent. Absolutely. So that leaves me to say a huge thank you to both of my guests, Nikkie-Chekita Jordan and Professor Toby Salt, for joining me. This is just the start of the Included Not Excluded journey. Each month we'll bring you stories and strategies from families, educators and experts, all working towards a world where no one is left out. If you'd like to learn more about Beyond Autism, access resources or support our work, please visit beyondautism.org.uk. And if this episode has inspired you, please consider making a donation. Every gift helps autistic children to thrive. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to being with you again next month.